One of the things, or perhaps the only thing really, that the Republican Party has to do in the course of the next 2 years, because it cannot govern conservatively with a Democrat in the White House and the Democrats in charge of the Senate, is to show voters that they are ready as an alternative government to the Democrats. They just had to show themselves sensible, reasonable, concerned with the interests and the concerns of American voters. Instead, they've chosen to start their majority of the House by in an intramural spat. They're just sort of spitting and at each other and incapable of getting on. And this is going to turn voters off.
Welcome to The Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with Editor-in-Chief Hugo Gurdon. And Hugo, the fight over the House speakership has dragged on for a historic 3 days now and counting. What are the long-term implications of how long this speakership fight has lasted?
The speakership fight has historically been just a single vote, but a century ago it went to scores of votes, and it was very, very contentious. The thing is, though, Sarah, that we already know the result even before a speaker has been chosen. The result is a disaster for the Republican Party. A totally needless, senseless, and avoidable self-inflicted wound. It's like they're sort of shooting one toe off at a time. Because they could have had this sorted out before it went to a vote. One of the things, or perhaps the only thing really, that the Republican Party has to do in the course of the next 2 years, because it cannot govern conservatively with a Democrat in the White House and the Democrats in charge of the Senate, is to show voters that they are ready as an alternative government to the Democrats. They just had to show themselves sensible, reasonable, concerned with the interests and the concerns of American voters. Instead, they've chosen to start their majority of the House by in an intramural spat. They're just sort of spitting and at each other and incapable of getting on. And this is going to turn voters off. If you can't govern yourselves, which the Republicans are showing they cannot, how can you possibly persuade voters that you can govern the country? This is a really, really dumb first few days for the Republicans, and they need to get it straight pretty quickly.
If you were an advisor to Kevin McCarthy right now, what advice would you give him for that path forward? Is there any path that puts him in the speakership and still has him with credibility?
You know, initially, it was possible to think that he was going to face some opposition, he'd make concessions, and then the rebels would fall into line. But the rebels have upped their demands even as he's made concessions. So one begins to get the idea that there is an irreducible rump of people who will never vote for McCarthy, and it's become personal. Whatever the pressure is obviously building on McCarthy to step aside and allow somebody else to stand. I don't know that I would advise him to step aside, but I would certainly say that it's becoming harder and harder for him not to, as it becomes more and more evident that the votes aren't there.
Do you think that voters will punish the holdouts in the next election? Or, the flip side of that is these holdouts that are in really conservative districts, might voters reward this, what they might see as an anti-establishment stand?
I think there are a lot of people who are amongst the rebels who are very confident that they will not get punished for this, and indeed it will be something that their constituents want. I think that it is likely to be the case that the voters in general will punish the party for this. There's no doubt that the Democrats have been given a weapon with which to bash the Republicans with this. The Republicans handed it to them with, very, very carefully at the beginning of the session, said, here you are, hit us over the head with this for the next 2 years until we go to the polls again. So I think that there will be punishment. Some of those rebels will perhaps be punished by their voters, but I think that most of them are pretty confident that they won't.
Well, Hugo, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more writing from Hugo and the rest of the commentary team at washingtonexaminer.com.